Hello everybody and welcome to another video. Today, finally, I am going to be doing my power rankings for the 2021 Overwatch League season. Before we jump into the rankings, I want to go over a couple of things, some rules and stuff to kind of establish for this these two power rankings videos as we go forward with the rest of the week. The first one is that, of course, these are my opinions, these are my thoughts on the teams. This is where I put these teams, and this is where I think they're going to be. This is kind of a number of different factors that I've used for this. It's based on the roster they have together, previous results with those rosters, players they've added and their histories, the synergy that I kind of see, news and rumors and stuff about the way the team's been kind of performing have all kind of shaped my thoughts on these teams. But ultimately, I know this is going to be probably incorrect in a lot of ways. There's going to be a lot of things about some of these teams that are not accurate, that are not close to right, and so I just want to establish that that is what is going on here. That is the way that these rankings are being done, and that is where I am putting teams and why I am putting them where I'm putting them. I also want to establish that I have already done videos for all of these teams. If you have not seen them, you can find them in the description that is linked in, or the playlist that is linked in the description, as well as at the end of the video and in the cards. So you can find that playlist. It'll have all of my videos, and you'll be able to find those in that playlist. And as I said, this is two videos, so this will be the first part where I go over teams 20 through 11. We're going over my bottom half of the league, and the other half will be coming out on Friday. I'm doing one video talking about both leagues together. Later on, I might split them up, break them down into league-specific, but going into the season, I just kind of want to talk about them in a league-wide setting, so that is what to expect. So those ground rules, let's jump into it, and let's start with number 20. So at number 20, I have the Los Angeles Valiant. I don't think this is a surprise to anybody. If you watch my video on this team, you know my thoughts on this team. If you watched any video on this team, you know everyone's thoughts on this team. It's a poorly built team. They have players out of position on different spots on this roster. They're off-rolling when they shouldn't be. This is not a well-built roster. I mean, this roster basically has no money going towards them because seemingly the Immortals team and the Immortals organization wants to put no money into supporting this team anymore. So really, this is a team with no real hope. They are not really trying, rumors say. They have someone who they brought in who was supposed to be a coach, probably just sitting on the bench the entire time as a rostered player now. It's a whole mess. It's a team that should not even exist in the state that it's in. It's a really unfortunate situation to even see a team put in this place. They have some players we've seen shine in the past, like Crystal. We didn't see a lot of Wea when he was with the league, but he was on, the Hongjoo Charge last season. But it's a lot of just kind of okay players on off roles and missing roles that they should have, and it's just a disaster of a team. It's poorly built. There's not a lot of synergy I can see happening. This is a team that's going to struggle a lot. So they are the 20th team on this list, and I have them, of course, as the bottom team in the APAC region I'll be playing for the 2021 season. Not a lot of hope for this team. Not a lot of expectations. Let's move on to number 19. At number 19, I have the Vancouver Titans. Now, this is an interesting team. A lot of Overwatch League veterans on this team. Linkser, Dalton, Shredlock, Rolf, those three were on this Titans team last year. They bring in Linkser, they bring in good old Fried Wiener and Fire. Fried Wiener and Fire both coming from the Atlanta Reign. They also bring in Teru, who is a flex DPS player coming in from O2 Blast. So they do have some talent on this team, but it's the type of thing where it's a lot of players where you can argue they are Overwatch League caliber players. They have been on tons of historic rosters before the Overwatch League, but it's really a question of how much are they going to be able to compete in a really good North American region. There's a lot of really good teams. A lot of these players are older veteran guys who we either haven't seen shine a lot or we haven't seen them do so in a while. Linkser had some good moments last season, late in the season especially, but, Fire barely got any playtime. Fried Wiener barely got any playtime last season. Dalton Strelak and Rolf, the Vancouver Titans were not very good last season, so we don't really know how good they are. It's a roster that has some potential. It's a better roster than the team that they had put together last season, in my opinion, so they have some definite potential to this roster, but in a lot of cases, I think this team is going to be outclassed by other teams in this North American region. I think they are the weakest team in North America, so I have them as the 12th team in North America and here in the 19th position overall. They could surprise us, but ultimately I think they are going to be one of the weakest teams in the league. Moving on to number 18, I have the Paris Eternal. Now this is an interesting team. I actually really like this Paris Eternal roster. I like a lot of the players on this roster. I thought Onigod had a great season last season. I was a big fan of Elivote as well last season, and I have been one of Neptuno's biggest supporters since 2018. Big fan of him. I love the way he plays, and I always have been a big fan of him. Bringing in some rookies as well, Naga and Don and Khan, some good players that we've seen perform in contenders. And then also Suna, who had some time last season on the Vancouver Titans, but very little, unfortunately. Very good tracer player, that's kind of what he's known for. And he's looked pretty good on it. So this is an interesting team to me. Some star players coming out of EU contenders, and even some coming from NA contenders. But generally, Western players coming from EU contenders, and a couple of Overwatch League veterans. The biggest one being Neptuno, and Onigod and Elivote, who had some time in the league last season, but not a lot. Suna as well. But I think one of the issues is, and we're going to see this again, is this is a team that's going to have to basically start from the beginning in terms of building and developing synergy. Most of these players don't have any history at all, or if they do have history, it's not a lot. And so they have to build that from the ground up. And they're competing once again in a very tough North American region where you have some really, really good teams towards the top. And I think that they're going to find themselves struggling. They're not even the best all-European roster, in my opinion. One of the reasons for that is they are a pretty slim roster. They only have the, required 7 players. I think that's something that is a little bit concerning. We've seen good performances out of these players, and I think if you're going to build a team like this, and you have some strong players, it can work out very well. But I do have some concerns about this team, and I think the way they've played in the past with some of these specific EU players is a bit of a sign for concern. Last time this roster was all European, they did not look very good back in 2019. So I think they have talent, and I think they have potential, but I think it's going to take them some time to develop their potential and to see that potential imagined. And one of the things that we've seen over time is that if you're not successful early on, you're going to struggle a lot down the road. And for that reason, I have the Eternal down here at 18. Definitely think they're going to surprise us at times, but ultimately I don't think they are going to be one of the best teams in the league. Speaking of other European teams being better than the Paris Eternal, let's talk about the London Spitfire, who I have here at 17. They have 8 players on this roster, so not much better than the Paris Eternal, but they have an additional DPS player. They have 4 DPS players in this roster. They have Blase, they have Shax, they have Hybrid, and eventually, come the 10th of June, I believe, they will have Sparker, who is a very talented hitscan player, who is currently underage, but he will be their primary hitscan player come June 10th. And they have some other things going for them that I think are better than the Paris Eternal. The London Spitfire will get better over time. Most teams do. Very rarely do teams get worse over time, unless the competition gets notably better. They may have a slower growth than some other teams. That's always possible, but typically what we don't see are teams get worse over time. This team already has a ton of pre-existing synergy. The core for this roster, Reaper, Kelix, Hadi, Molfig, Sparker, those players all played together in contenders on British Hurricane. That is what this team is. You add some new pieces like Blase, like Shax, like Hybrid, who were not on that team. But even then, there's still some pre-existing synergy with the likes of Shax and Molfig and Kelix, all being Danish players, all of whom played on the same, World Cup teams and who know each other well as a result of that. And so even when you kind of bring in some of these other pieces and you work them into the team, there is already some type of synergy there. So it's not going to take them as long, I think, to reach their potential. I think they naturally have more talent when you look and you say, this is the team that dominated European contenders for over a year, and they took that team and they made it better. And I think we are going to see a lot of improvement from this London Spitfire team over time. It is the thing that I think they have going for them the most. They're slightly better than the Paris Eternal on my list, but I think there is a bit of a gap there between the two teams. We've seen some good performances out of London. They're a team that I think might surprise me and end up actually being somewhat higher on the list than where I have them right now, but for right now, I have them here at 17, and I have them as the 10th overall team in the North American region. Coming in at 16, I have the Houston Outlaws. I was very, very, very close to dropping them below the likes of London and Paris. I think that there's a very, very, very close group in these three. But ultimately, the thing that helped me or led me to bumping this Outlaws team up above the likes of those teams is that I do think they have a ton of really talented players on this roster, and I think they have a ton of potential based on what we've seen from some of these players in the past. I'm a big believer in a lot of the players on this team. Dante, Happy, KSF, Hydration, Crimzo. These are players we know are very good. We've seen them perform at very high levels in the past. Their DPS line is very solid. There's some concerns with this DPS lineup, but they have a lot of DPS players. They have, I believe, 5, which is more than I think most teams want. And there's a lot of concerns about what role Jake will have returning to this team, but I do think that this team has a ton of really strong DPS potential. I thought Crimzo was a very, very good flex support last season. I think there is no doubt in my mind that he is the best Western flex support in the Overwatch League. And then you have some questions, of course, around these new rookie players in Piggy, Jongu, and Juby. Juby, the only main support on this team, rookie player, played most recently when in Collegiate, played on Contenders before that. We haven't seen a lot from him. But then Piggy and Jongu coming from Talon Esports, coming into a team setting where they will be coached by Junkbuck, who is one of the most respected coaches in the scene right now, had a ton of influence and impact on that World Cup team for Team USA that won back in 2019. And I think that's kind of the big make or break thing for me is I know that there are good head coaches and there's good coaching staffs involved with the likes of the London Spitfire and the Paris Eternal. But I have a ton of faith in Junkbuck and I have a ton of faith in Harsha to coach this team, to be able to make the best of this team, to bring out the most in all of these players. And for that reason, I do think they get the edge. They have a ton of talented players who we've seen perform at the highest level already, and a coaching staff that I think will elevate them to the next level. For that reason, I have them here on the list at 16, and they are, in my opinion, the 9th best team in North America. At number 15, I have a team that might interest a lot of people, might make people a little questioning why I have them where I have them. I have the Toronto Defiant here at 15. I think the Toronto Defiant have a very solid foundation to this roster. Most of these players in this roster I think are very good. I think there's not a lot of issues with them. Big fan of Sato and Lastro and Hisu. Those are players I think are very good. Will contribute a lot to this team. But there are a lot of players as well that I have some concerns about. Michelle I thought was pretty good when he played for the Seoul Dynasty in 2019, but I never thought he was incredible. I thought a lot of his value came from the fact that he could play the Diva or he could play the Sombra, and that was kind of his main role that allowed him to really have a big impact in a GOATS meta where Sombra was able to be played and could have a huge impact. He comes into a team playing for a coach that he knows well, but how much is he going to work for this team? We don't really know yet. And you pair that with, as well, Logix, who is really their best sniper player, their best dedicated hit scan player. The majority of this roster is Korean. Will Logix have a spot on this team? You would think so, but it is kind of weird. There are some questions for this team in that way. They have some rookies in Aztec and Ansun J as their support line. You also have Lastro, who's very good, and I think Lastro will start, but, you know, you're definitely going to see Ansun J because he is their only main support, and you're probably going to see some instances where Aztec is playing as well. You also have Beast on this roster. What purpose he kind of serves on this roster now, interesting when you already have a very Korean roster built. You have the likes of Nace, who have been good in contenders in the past, but how good is he going to be going forward? It's hard to say. One of the big things that I think is holding this roster back for me right now is just that we haven't really gotten to see them play in anything recently. We haven't seen any real tournaments with the Toronto Defiant recently, so we haven't gotten to see them play at a high level. I think they have a lot of talent, and they have some good players on this team, but I'm curious to see how this team is going to work in terms of integrating these Korean players into a roster where you have some Western players. And if you're going to have synergy with your Korean roster and you play your Korean roster predominantly and have to bring in Logics every so often for certain roles, or even possibly bring in Beast, which I don't see happening very often, but in the event that that happens, will that cause problems? Will that cause issues? I have questions and concerns about this roster, and because I haven't seen them play very much, I have them a little bit low on this list. I think a lot of people would not agree with where I have them, but I have them here at 15 overall, and I have them as the 8th team, I believe, in North America. Moving on to number 14, I have the Boston Uprising. This one might come as a surprise to a lot of people because the Boston Uprising historically have not been a great team. But I'm a huge fan of the moves that the Boston Uprising made in this offseason, and I also think that they've done a lot of performances in tournaments and stuff to give me some confidence in the way this roster is built. Yes, there are some interesting things with this roster, such as the fact that the majority of the time, I believe the starting roster is going to be 5 Korean players and 1 Western player. That's not necessarily something that's not going to work. I know that was one of my concerns with the Toronto Defiant. It is a concern with the Toronto Defiant, but I do think it can work very well. And I've also seen the Boston Uprising perform and play, and they have players who I know have some of those experiences playing in those rosters. For example, Soon, who is on this Uprising team, was on the Paris Eternal last season. And the Paris Eternal often were running 4 Korean players and 2 Western players. Or even 3 and 3. But I know Soon has been in that environment and has played in that environment, and even when he was with the LA Valiant previously, so he knows what it's like to work in that type of environment. Even a player like I'm 37, who is fluent in both Korean and English, he can provide a ton of help for this team, and I think is going to be a central piece to this team. And of course you have Myunbong, who was with this team last season. So you get some levels of familiarity there with players who already know how to do that. And while Punk is the only Western player that will pretty much guaranteed always be playing, you at least have a sense of knowing that there are players on this team who have experience playing in these mixed nationality rosters. I don't have as much confidence in with the Toronto Defiant because of, they have some who have done it, but not everybody has done it. And I think that is one of the things that makes this Uprising team more understandable and makes me feel more confident about them. And we've seen them perform pretty well in tournaments. They did well in the Steel Series Invitational. They also, they won the Experimental Guard tournament. Not that means too much considering that game, that patch will never hit live, but it's things like that that really give me some faith in the way this team looks. Speaking of faith, very good look from him so far on the main support role. Valentine has looked very good, so this is a team that I think has a lot of potential and some strong players. They've talked about where they're aiming, and they see themselves as kind of that upper middle of the pack, and I think that is really where they are right now. I think they have a ton of potential. I think they have an organization, believe it or not, that has actually provided them some resources to succeed. Bring in some players, accepting this kind of move over to Korean contenders and developing talent over there to try to bolster this team. I think that the addition of Laurie was a very good head coaching addition. So really, I am a fan of what this Uprising team has done to improve for this season. I think they have a ton of potential. That is why I have them here at 14, and I have them as my 7th overall team in North America. Another pick that'll probably be pretty controversial is my number 13 team. I have the Hongjoo Spark. I'm very, very high on this Hongjoo Spark roster on paper. But I think there may be some issues with this team and getting it to work with 7 Korean players and 5 Chinese players. Very rarely do we see 12-man rosters find any success. Yes, the Shanghai Dragons last season had a 12-man roster. They only ever ran about 7 players from that roster. Very rarely do we see successful teams that are utilizing these big rosters. And we've never seen a roster of about half and half Korean and Chinese in the league. And I have a lot of concerns about whether or not that will work. Because to me, this seems like a potential recipe for disaster as you try to give equal play time to all of the players on this team to find their footing on this team, to have their position on this team, when maybe that isn't what you should be focusing on. Maybe the best thing for this Hongjoo Spark roster is to immediately find those 6 to 7, maybe 8 players who have the biggest impact on this team, and you play them full-time as much as you can, which is something that will take some time. And I think that developing this roster to be its best form is not going to happen overnight. It's going to take them time. It's going to be growing pains. And for me, that is the biggest thing that makes me hesitant to name this team as a very good upper level team. I think they have a ton of talent on paper. I am not denying how good these players are. I think you could argue that these are the 5 Chinese players on this team. You could argue that is 5 of the best Chinese players in the league. And when you have the likes of MCD and Bernard and Architect and Godsby and even Takoyaki on this team in your Korean side of this roster, and I still think IDK and Sominsu are very good as well, you have a really strong set of players. But I don't know how this team is going to function. I have a lot of questions about how this team is going to work together, how they're going to synergize, how they're going to make X work and Y work together when it seems like there could be some issues. And so for that reason, I have them somewhat low on this list. Love a lot of these players, but I need to see them in action, and they've been slow to adapt in the past, and so I have a lot of concerns about whether or not this team will be able to be good pretty early on. So despite their position as my second lowest team in APAC, they are still pretty high on my overall list as a 13 overall in my power rankings. Concerning, but I do think they have a lot of really talented players. Speaking of 12-man rosters in APAC, at number 12, I have the Chengdu Hunters. Once again, one of my big problems with this roster is it is a 12-man roster. But it's a 12-man roster that still has some areas that I feel a little concerned by. Now, there are some areas where I think they've actually done things better than what the Hongjoo Spark have done. They're a 12-man roster, but they have very clear hierarchies in certain roles. Eviltall and Late Young are two-way players. You know that those 2 players are going to have specific roles that they will fill at specific times. Late Young are really, really good Zarya players, so if a Zarya meta comes around, that's probably when we would see him come in. Eviltall would come in if they need a Mercy or something like that, where you know that Eviltall is going to be better in that role. That's where you're going to see those players come in. So you can expect Elsa and Nisha, their off-tank and their main support, to be the primary players in those positions. DPS, I'm never really that concerned when you have 3 or 4 DPS. They have Jinmu, they have Leave, they have Jimmy, they have Kaneki. Those 4 will have their different spots. They'll carve them out. May take some time to figure out exactly how they want to play around those DPS, but those are not the things that concern me. My main concerns come in the main tank role and the flex support role. This team used to have Molly. They trade Molly to the Shanghai Dragons, bring in Farway 1987, and then bring in Monk just last week or a couple weeks ago to be their other flex support. They promote him from Team Chaser, their academy team. He's not on a 2-way contract to everything we know. He's on a full-fledged Overwatch League contract, so gives me some concern about that position. And then you have Among and Gaga. We know that Gaga is a really good main tank player. His Wrecking Ball is really, really good. Well, we also know Among is really good at Wrecking Ball. He's kind of the player that revolutionized Wrecking Ball. So if Wrecking Ball is meta, well, then who's going to play there? If it's not meta, you'd expect it to be far away, or not far away, Gaga. But in the past, this team never really played that well around anybody other than Among. So I do have some questions about this team. There are a lot of players on this roster. That makes me a little bit nervous about how well they'll perform. I do think they have a ton of really talented players. This is the best team of Chinese players that you could, the only way you can make this roster even better was if you took some of those players from Hangzhou, like Gushui and Liga and Shy even. You kind of get some of these really good players that are sitting on the Hongjoo Spark roster and bring them over here. You could make a Chinese super team just in the Overwatch League. So I do think this is a good team. There's some really good players on this team. I think they're in a better position than Hangzhou because you don't have those mixed nationality issues you're trying to work through and get to work and figure out. But ultimately, I think that this roster is still not as good as I think a lot of other people are saying it is. Maybe that's just me not being familiar enough with these players, but I do have some questions. Yes, they did win the recent tournament, but once again, you only really learn so much from that. So a good team, but I do have concerns, and I don't think they are going to be one of the best of the best in APAC. Finally, at number 11, we have one that I even find a little surprising that I have them as low as they do. It is the Atlanta Reign. I'm a really big fan of this Reign roster. I think they have a lot of really, really talented players. But ultimately, one of the issues that I find with this Reign roster is just that the North America region is really, really, really stacked. And I think that their opportunities to find success, the opportunities to find tournament games and to really kind of make their mark in tournaments is going to be a lot more difficult than some of these other teams in, say, APAC, or in those kind of like middle of the pack to upper middle of the pack there, because there's only so many teams in APAC. Your teams like your Guangzhou's, your New York's, your Seoul's, where you think they're good teams and they might be middle of the pack to upper middle of the pack, especially more so Seoul there in the upper middle of the pack region. I think Atlanta is really good, and I think you put them head-to-head with a lot of teams in this league, they would be very, very good. They have a really, really good DPS trio. Between Kai and Pelican and Edison, I mean, there is nothing in my mind that I am really concerned about with those three. Where my concerns for this roster lie is in the rest of the roster. Gator and Hawk are good, okay? Like, they're not bad. They're pretty average, I'd say. But they were pretty average last season. I think the league as a whole has had a major talent upgrade in terms of players, and so it is difficult at times to look at this team and to think that this is a really star-studded tank line. And this support line, where you have Masa, who has a history in the Overwatch League, and Iris, who came in late last season. I'm really excited to see Iris play. I think he's a really good player, and I'm really excited to see what he brings to this team going forward. Masa is a player who was pretty good last season, though I don't think he was the best. I thought he was better in 2019. So there are some kind of areas on this roster where I think they struggle more. If there is a DPS-heavy meta, this is a team that is going to thrive. They are going to be a team that gets carried by their DPS. Pelican is amazing. Kai is incredible. Edison is absolutely bonkers in the way he plays. Those are the players that are going to be the best for this team. It's a question of how well can the rest of those pieces work well and stay together to keep this team at a high level of competition and keep them competing with the best of the best in North America. It's going to be difficult because there's a lot of very good teams. So that's why I have them here at 11, because I think that in terms of kind of that tournament success and that overall success, we've seen the Atlanta Reign kind of struggle to find some of that potential that their roster has. And for that reason, I am keeping them here at 11. But that is it for part 1 of my power rankings. Those are teams 20 through 11. Definitely some ones that I think could definitely be much higher than where I have them. And there's going to be some teams that I think I have a wrong read on. But that's always what happens. Power rankings are hard. This season especially has been very difficult to do the rankings. So let me know your thoughts on where I put teams in the comments down below. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to have a nice discussion with you. And I'd love to talk with you all about what I have done. like I said at the beginning of the video, if you want to hear my full in-depth thoughts on any of these teams, there is a link in the playlist, or a playlist in the description down below, as well as in the cards, and it'll be here in the end screen so you can see it here real soon. Be on the lookout on Friday for part 2, where I will go through teams 10 through 1, the best of the best in the league, and we will see who I think really is the team to beat in the 2021 season. But that is all for me for today. If you enjoyed, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. Hope you're all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.